What's up, folks, and welcome to Retro Ramble. So, y'all remember that awesome new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game I covered a while back? Well, how about instead of a new one, we get a big history lesson on all the stuff that came before. And that is what this is, and what a collection it is. So, this is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga Collection. And so back in the 1980s, when the sort of first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon was out and they were really hitting their initial stride of popularity, Konami put out a ton of games based on them for a variety of different systems. And they were very well revered at the time, and many still are today. And this is sort of a package of a whole bunch of those. So there's too many to just rhyme off to you here. So you can see them on the screen right now, the entire batch that we've got here. And this collection comes to us from Digital Eclipse, who are one of a small number of studios who I think are absolute masters at these collections, both in terms of the overall quality of the way the emulation works, in terms of how these games play, and the additional features that they bring to the table. The options for these games are not as crazy as something like an M2 collection, but those collections often have a ton of options that no one in their right mind would ever want to use. They're cool to have, but you don't really need them. This is definitely more simplified. This collection, I think, is definitely going to appeal to people like myself who have that reverence for the older games. For a newer generation, I mean, there's a lot on offer here, but it's also pretty steep price-wise, which I'm sure has to do more with licensing than anything else. So, let's dig in here. So, you have 13 games in this collection, spanning the arcades, the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, and the Game Boy. So, quite a wide variety of them. Now, some of those are kind of repeats, or rather different versions of the same title, done for different platforms. They also did one thing which is pretty cool, which is online play for certain games only. So, not all of them, because some of these games were not multiplayer to begin with. And they just don't have it for every system either. So you've got it for the original TMNT arcade game, the sequel Turtles in Time, Tournament Fighters, which is a fighting game. You have the Super Nintendo version for that. And then you have what's called Hyperstone Heist, which is another brawler game that came out on the Genesis. Those are the only ones with online. All of them have local multiplayer that have multiplayer options. So we can go and check those out. In addition to that, one of the things Digital Eclipse does that I really like is that they put in a lot of extras with the games. Things to show you that are related to the titles, and things that you can, that little bits of history and interesting types of things that you might want to look at. Now, they have other collections coming that are actually going to have videos with interviews and stuff like that. This, unfortunately, does not have any of that. And that's because I imagine that not only were these games made a long time ago, but Konami, being Konami, most of those people probably either aren't there anymore or just didn't want to do anything with them. You know, that's kind of the way that is. But they have all of these crazy high-resolution scans of things like the box art and arcade flyers and manuals and, like, look at all this. You know, they have manuals, they have concept artwork, they have all kinds of stuff like this. And as you can see, there's a search function here that narrows everything down. As you can see, there's 3,741 different assets in here. So they didn't skimp, needless to say. So here's one of the things here. So this is a whole bunch of either concept art, or that's footage from the cartoon, the old cartoon, to show some of these different things, all kinds of design docs. You know, a lot of people probably don't care about this stuff, but I think it's really cool. I think it's very important for the sake of preservation to be able to showcase things like this. And that's what Digital Eclipse is really good at. They actually have a very well-known gaming archivist on staff that sort of helps them find all this stuff out, and they work for they work with the Video Game History Foundation as well to really find out a lot of that stuff. So I mean, you know, this is just super cool. I mean, this is all stuff related to the arcade game, arcade flyers, you know, manuals and promotional docs for arcade operators. You never saw this stuff back in the day. And if you're a hardcore retro nerd like I am, this stuff is just candy. You just love it, you know? And I think it's super cool. Like I said, videos would have been nice, but you can't get everything. So there's a lot of cool stuff in here. There's also strategy guides. Each game in here has a strategy guide that you can pull up that shows you how to deal with certain enemies. Some of the games that have cheat codes, it will show you that. There's little tips in here specifically from Digital Eclipse that you can see that goes over all of these things just to maximize your play experience if you want. Really cool stuff. There's a, you know, music jukebox here. So like the old school sound test mode in the 16-bit era. You can pick anything that you want from any of the games in the collection and listen to the music from that at will. Super cool. And then there's, yeah, here's the behind the scenes. So again, these are behind the scenes with design documents and stuff like that. This is just another way to surface all that if you don't want to use the search function. So yeah, a lot of extras in here for sure, but we're here to talk about the games. Now, I'm not going to do a little review of each of these games in particular. You know if you want to play these or not. So this is going to be more talking about the collection and some of what it offers. So I'm going to show you kind of a selection of games from all the different platforms that are available. So this is the original classic, the original arcade game. So you can fire it straight up. They also have what's called enhancements. So a lot of these games have the ability to jump around and to activate cheats. You can set the starting level, you can turn on God mode, you can turn on a nightmare mode that's way more difficult. You can remove penalty stuff, you can do all these things and that allow you to just muck about with the experience as you want. It doesn't have the full bevy of options. There's some collections out there that actually allow you to alter the dip switches on the actual arcade board so that you can really customize it to the nth degree. This doesn't do that, and the other cool feature is every game has what's called a watch function, and this allows you to watch a playthrough by, I guess it's someone from Digital Eclipse or a really good player, because it's basically like an esports grade S-rank single credit run of all the games, including some of these that are brutal, like Tournament Fighters in the NES game. Really cool stuff. And what's even better about that is you can jump around these to take a look at different things, and you can just press a button and it jumps you right in. How cool is that? So if you want to go into a specific point in the game, or you're trying to practice a certain area or whatever, you can just watch this playthrough, watch the person get past, you know, where you're having trouble, and you literally push a button and you jump right in with not even a slightest delay. How friggin' cool is that? That's something you don't often see in collections like this, and it is a wonderful feature that I really, really like. So, alright, so I'm going to jump into this proper. So we'll pick our starting turtle here. These ROMs are a little bit different in the sense that, like... So listen here. I can tell you right now... So they've altered these ROMs a bit. There used to be a whole bunch of extra copyright info there. And that theme song did not sound that clean in the arcade. Most of the other sound effects and music in this is the original quality. I don't know why they cleaned up the theme song so much. It's a little weird, but it's fine. But purists are going to have an issue with that. So because this is an arcade game and you don't have you can just feed credits straight into it if you like. Always lots of fun. So you can hear the sort of crunchy audio quality on the voices there, which is original, but this music is way too clean. Again, licensing is weird, y'all. So, but here we go. And yeah, you're straight into it, and you can have people jump in with you if you want, locally or online. Now, I'm gonna say the online netcode is not great. I have never been able to actually find a game to join in this. I've always had to start a game and then wait for people to come in. Now, they can come in mid-game, which is nice. You don't have to wait at a menu or anything like that. But I found there's a lot of lag, a lot of people skipping around, and a lot of people tend not to stick around that long as a result of that. Now, I am on PC. I don't know what this is like on the consoles. I also don't know why so many of these retro collections that offer online play seem to have very similar problems with lag. So I understand you're taking games that never had online and trying to sort of layer online netcode on top of them, but and it's probably a bigger challenge than I think it is. But at the same time, if you're going to offer it, especially in a collection that's this expensive, you got to do it right, guys. I'm sorry. There's been no patches to this yet that I'm aware of, so hopefully that's something they can maybe fix up a little bit, because it really kind of, it's not great. I'm not a big fan of that, but so that's something to keep in mind. But in every game, you do have some various options here. So you can load and save. There are loading and save states. The one thing that is a bit of a bummer is there's only one save state per game, which kind of bums me out. You can't have multiple things to, you know, to try to work strategies and move around, which is kind of a bummer, but you can save and load super fast. It's got the little strategy guides that I talked about. You can remap all your controls, which is very nice. I do appreciate that. And you have a few screen options here. So you can go original, which is pixel perfect. You can go full, which more or less maintains that aspect ratio, but stretches it out a bit. And then you can go wide, which is for you sadistic buggers who don't like any border art, but also like the game to look like crap. You're bad people if you use this. And then you can turn on different levels of scanline filter for people who like that. I don't like scanlines personally. A lot of people do. And you can just turn the border on and off. Now, compared to some collections, a lot of people are going to look at that and go, that's a pretty weak set of options. And yeah, again, compared to like one of the collections from M2 or something like that that let you do basically anything you want with the game, and even some of the Radaleka collections I've covered, yeah, it's a little weak, but for your average player, that's mostly what they're going to need. Most people are just going to play these in their full defaults like I'm doing now. So they put in the options here that I think most people are going to care about. And to be honest with you, if you are the most hardcore arcade purist, you're either playing this thing on your original cabinet or you're running it in emulators, which allow you to customize a lot more anyway. And this pack is really probably not even for you in that case. But yeah, so you can quit out and you can do this for basically every game. Different games have different enhancements depending on their platform and the options that they have available. So you can see here, you can change speed modes, you can turn friendly fire on and off in some of the games. You know, it's pretty interesting. So let's check out Hyperstone Heist. So this one is on the Genesis or Mega Drive. So here's the thing. There have been some complaints about this collection, that the one thing that people haven't liked is that they have said that this collection is not emulated super well because it has input lag. Now, I've tried my best to try to replicate that problem. I've loaded these games up in emulators. I have an AtGames Legends Ultimate arcade cabinet that I've loaded the games up on as well to try them out. And is there input lag? There probably is a little bit, yes. But I don't think you can blame Digital Eclipse for that, because the reason for that is all of these games were designed for a very specific type of screen. And with the exception of the Game Boy titles, these were all designed in an era where you played on CRT displays, whether in arcade cabinets or on CRT televisions at home. And CRTs and even fairly new high-end LCDs have input lag. They just are not as smooth as a CRT television, which had virtually no lag. Now, the lag can be very small, even only a couple of milliseconds or a couple of frames. The vast majority of people, whether enthusiasts or otherwise, are not even going to notice. And if they do, it's going to be so minute as to not care. Lag of a few frames can be very important in something like a fighting game, but in something like this, not really. So I don't think that the lag that is in this is any worse than you would normally experience just by playing this game in an emulator on an LCD monitor as opposed to the CRT monitor it was designed for. LCD display technology barely existed when most of these games were made. So that's the thing. And again, if input lag is that important to you in games like this, you're already playing these in a different setup that accommodates your needs. So this pack may not be for you in that situation. It's just something to keep in mind. So that's the Genesis one. Now, as I said, some of the games in this collection are repeats. So like there's multiple versions of TMNT Tournament Fighters here. There's the Genesis version, the Super Nintendo version, and the NES version, which before now I didn't even know had an NES version. There's also NES versions of the arcade games and things like that, and these are obviously much lower lower capability than the arcade versions or the 16-bit console versions would be. There's also, this is the NES version of this game, of TMNT, which is not based on the the first one is not based on the arcade game at all. This is a game that, frankly, some people actually really like this. Most people hate it because it was unbelievably, stupidly difficult. And the controls are not very good, and, you know, your character is very floaty, and the levels don't play well, and enemies respawn all the time, and it plays really, really cheap. This was put out by Ultra Games, which was Konami's sort of budget label that they invented back then to get around the restrictions that Nintendo put, where you could only release so many NES games per year. Some people like this, some people hate it. I played a bunch of this back in the day. I don't think it's as bad as the true haters say. I also don't think it's good. Like, no. If you want to play Turtles, this is not the way you want to do it. But nonetheless, it's here, and it's a cool little history lesson, and if you like the game, you can play it. And yes, you can, because you have save states, you can take some of that pain out of it. You know, and again, it's emulated well. It has, you know, it's the NES warts and all. So you see, you've got some of the weird, you know, sprite hitching, and, you know, you've got some of the slowdown. You've got sprites that flicker in and out. But the interesting thing is, you can actually deal with some of that in the enhancements, which is really cool. So you can actually enable remove slowdown or remove sprite flicker. And emulators are able to do this too, by basically sort of, so you see down there how the life bar is not doing that weird flicker scroll? Yep. And you'll see here that the things are a lot less flickery, and that the frame rate and pacing of the frame rate is much more consistent. And they're basically doing that by injecting things into the emulation that will they're either applying a dynamic software-based overclock that makes the emulator run faster on demand so it doesn't slow down. And they're doing, I forget what it is, but there's a technique for removing flicker on the NES that you can do without actually breaking the games or causing any other kind of problems. And they implemented that, and I love to see that. It's not on by default, but if you want to play these games in a form with some nice little quality of life improvements on the visual side, there it is, and you can totally do that. And I think they did a real nice job with that, because this game in particular had some wicked bad flicker in it. Holy crap, man. So yeah, really nice little things like that they've implemented. I still want to sit down. I want to sit down with a cup of tea and actually watch the video play of this, because watching someone who can get through this in one go that's some god tier play there, bud. So, and yeah, this is the arcade game. I'm going to show you this very briefly. It's the NES version of it. Now, a lot of people might be like, well, they're kind of cheating here because they're putting in multiple versions of the game, including ones that are objectively inferior from a technology standpoint. They are, but here's why I think that's okay. Because, number one, when you were growing up, you may have only been able to play the arcade game this way. Maybe this is the only version you had access to. And while the arcade version is better, this is the one that you remember. And this is the one that holds all the nostalgia for you. That's important. Nostalgia is what these collections are selling themselves on. You know, sure, I could bring over some young kids and put them in front of this, and they probably have fun with it. But people who have a fondness for the original games are the ones that they're trying to sell to here. And to be able to play the version that you grew up with while also playing the other higher end versions that maybe you never got to experience at the time is cool, because it gives you sort of the best of both worlds. And I also think from the historical angle that this is really nice in that it gives you the opportunity to see what they were trying to pull off with these. Like, Konami back in the day had some absolutely god-tier programmers and developers on their staff. And when you think about, if you know anything about this stuff, if you know how inferior power-wise the NES was compared to what they could do with arcade boards, that they made a game, that they took this arcade game, this 16-bit arcade game, that ran on a very powerful board at the time and managed to downscale it to the NES while keeping pretty much all of the core gameplay intact and running at a good speed too. That's impressive, man. Like, it's really amazing what Konami was able to do with this. And I think that's really cool. And it's really neat to be able to play the different versions and be like, you know, I never played one of the TMNT arcade games on the Genesis. What was that like? And you can see it. How did it sound different? How did it look different? How did it play different? Because all of these have their own little subtle differences in terms of mechanics and story progression and even level design. They're not all carbon copies of each other. Each version had their own little differences and flourishes to them, which I think is really neat. And it's neat for you to be able to go through the eras and see all of that. Some people are going to think this sort of duplication kind of dilutes the value of the collection. I honestly think it enhances it. So, you know, so you have this here. You've got Tournament Fighters. The NES version of this is kind of, well, Tournament Fighters is cool, but it's not great in a lot of ways because it's a slow fighting game. It doesn't play super well, and the AI cheats. Oh my god, does it cheat. But so this is sort of there's an NES version on here, and as well as the Genesis version. This is the version most people remember, the one from the Super Nintendo. Tournament Fighters didn't actually come out in the arcade. So it was only a home release. But it had really cool production values, and though it doesn't play especially well, I think, and again, the AI is just unbelievably unfair, it's cool that it's here. And again, in all of its different versions. And you're going to see the NES, Genesis, and Super Nintendo versions of this game are all very different. Again, not carbon copies of each other. You could tell that Konami had different teams and different developers working on them, who in some cases had different... the games all follow a certain core flow and design, but you could tell that each team had their own little ideas and their own little flourishes and their own little creative tweaks that they put in. They're not all exactly the same, and you get to see those differences and maybe be like, you know, I played this on the Super Nintendo, but oh, they did this differently on the Genesis, and wow, they made an NES version of this. Let me check that out, right? And all that stuff is really cool, and that's where I think the appeal is on this. If you want to sort of be an archaeologist of this series, because this series had a lot of games in it, and it was incredibly popular. The Turtles games sold incredibly well back in the day, and it's really neat sort of history and archaeology lesson, not just from all the artifacts and assets that I told you about, but to see the different ways these games work. So the last platform I'll show you here is the Game Boy, and this is a fascinating one too, because the Game Boy was obviously a much more limited system and was not multiplayer. So you might be like, well, how did they do that? So these are all little platformer titles, effectively. Are they amazing? No. On the Game Boy at the time, they were pretty cool within the limitations of what the Game Boy has going on. And you can see they tried to make a brawler out of this as best they could on the Game Boy, and it looks pretty good. I'll tell you what, on the Game Boy at the time, this looked pretty darn cool. Now, one thing I'm going to say that I wish Digital Eclipse had done with this is you may be looking at this if you had a Game Boy back in the day and going, this doesn't look right. The Game Boy was green. Why is this black and white? Well, actually, the Game Boy was a black and white system. It's just the LCD panels that they got to put in the Game Boy were had green backgrounds, but that actually was a black and white screen. What I do wish Digital Eclipse did here, and a lot of Game Boy emulators do this, is I really wish they gave you the option to change this colorization. So some of them you could make it black and white, some of them you could make it sort of green and black, you could make it blue and black, you could change around how the colorization looked. You still kept it a two-color palette, but you could change it to colors that you wanted to make it a little easier on the eyes. Like this is really bright. As someone who likes to use dark mode for every app that has it, this is a little bit much for me. I actually would have liked it if I could have, you know, change the colors to something that had a little less contrast to them and weren't quite so punchy. I do wish they did that, but this is what you're stuck with here. But again, this is a really cool history lesson because all of these games actually are quite a bit different. And you really get to see how Konami's both design and technological prowess on the Game Boy really evolved over time. So I'll show you each of these quick because this is the series that I think evolved the most. So this is the second one, which you actually get to change between the different characters in this one. You only got to play it, so you get to change this around. They all play a little bit different. It's still the brawler, but you can see the level of graphical detail has gone up substantially. And this is kind of this borrows one trait from the NES game, which is that if one of your turtles dies, they get captured and you have to pick another one. And that's sort of how your live system works. You alter between the different characters. And, you know, you can see that this is very much, in the time between the first one and this one, they really did advance their craft quite a bit. And then, if you go to the third one, this one, which I never touched back in the day, I didn't even know there was a third Turtles game on the Game Boy. This one really fascinated the heck out of me because they not only made the game run at a really nice 60 frames a second, they turned it basically into a Metroidvania. This is not just a standard left to right, you know, platform brawler thing. I'll show you what this looks like. But yeah, you can see here. So this runs a lot better. The other games ran at a much lower frame rate. This runs at a really nice 60 frames a second. The sprites are smaller and the environments are smaller, yes. So some of it was due to that. But this works. This was a big technological evolution. And then when you sort of go into the main area here, check this out. They turned Turtles into they actually turned it into a little Metroidvania as opposed to just an arcade game. And this is where I went, okay, this collection is super cool because this was fascinating to me. The fact that I could come in here and see how this series evolved and go, wow, in only a couple of years, Konami took this from a kind of okay brawler, you know, a brawler that was okay by Game Boy standards, but didn't run particularly well. And then they made a third entry that ran way, way better and completely upended the style of gameplay. And this is the only Turtles game that's like this, that has this Metroidvania mechanic. And it was on the Game Boy. You know, you didn't get this style of game on any of the other platforms, including the much more technologically advanced home systems. And like I said, Konami had a huge amount of talent on their teams back in the day, and who were able to make a wide variety of different things. And even though these are all Turtles games, they're all very different, and they all have, even the same game across multiple platforms has its own differences that make them stand out and make it a different experience to play them. You're not just playing the exact same game with different technology. I really think that's cool. I really enjoy that kind of thing. So, and you see, and this here is kind of cool. This will, this enhancement allows you to enable map icons so that it will actually tell you where your objectives are. You know, things like that. How cool is that? And yes, you can switch back and forth between the US and Japanese versions. I didn't mention that. All it really does, it doesn't really affect the gameplay. It just changes the language that it's displayed in. But not, there are some other changes depending on the games, but they're all fairly subtle. And but again, neat that it's there. Are you going to use it a lot? Probably not. But it's really cool that it's here. So, as a collection, what do I think about this? I think it's really good. I think hardcore purists maybe would wish that it had, you know, a few more features. I wish it did this. I wish it did that. I wish it had this other thing. And I get that. But again, if you're someone who's that into playing these things a very specific way, you know, that's very much attuned to the way that you want, you're not going to buy this collection. You have an emulation system set up where you have the game tuned exactly the way you want it. And this was not really made for you. If you never played these games back in the day, will this interest you? If you have an interest in retro stuff, yes. If you have an interest in sort of the history of games and where they came from, yes. But the price tag is pretty high for that. Again, it's probably due to licensing, but that doesn't matter from the consumer's point of view. There's a lot of games in here, but a lot of them are very similar to each other, and this is near AAA price for this collection. And while it's very well made and it has a lot of really cool other artifacts in that for people who really want to nerd out over it, it's a lot of money that they're asking for this. But for people like me who are really into the history and really find things like arcade flyers and manuals and all that kind, and box art and that really fascinating, just having these in an easily accessible place where you legally own them and you can just hit a button and start it up and you don't have to mess with anything, and you can get that little nostalgic hit and get a whole bunch of cool artifact stuff out of it as well. I mean, yeah, would I have paid full price for this and felt satisfied? Yes, I would. But I'm a retro nut, and maybe I don't think that's for everybody. So the value proposition is really going to have to be up to you. But it is a great pack. It's very well put together by people who clearly have a reverence for the source material. And it's cool that Konami has allowed this to get made, especially modern Konami. So yeah, that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Collection. You can get this in all kinds of different places, which is great to see. I recommend it, but with the caveat that value is subjective, and I think it's going to be extra subjective for people on this particular one. But I think it's a great pack. I think as usual, Digital Eclipse absolutely nailed it. And they are doing some other bigger packs coming down the road that I'm very excited for, and I'm very interested to see. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I do appreciate it. I know this was a longer video, but there's a lot to talk about in these collections, and the people who really want to know, right, you want to know all the details, so that's why I did that. So if you did like what you saw here, please do all the normal YouTube things, like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment down below. Tell me, what do you think of this collection? Do you think the value is decent for you? Is your nostalgia high enough that you think this is worth the asking price? What do you think you would get for it? What other collections would you like to see come out from either Konami or other developers? There's so much cool stuff out there, and the more of it that we can get in an easily accessible modern fashion, the better, in my humble opinion. So I'd love to hear about that. And as always, you can follow me over at twitch.tv/pxabstraction for multiple variety streams a week. I cover indies and retro over there too, but often a lot of things that are better suited to streaming than YouTube. I have a great community there, and I'd love to see you be a part of it. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you on the next Retro Ramble. You folks have yourselves a good one. Take her easy.